Today, why each and every Nikon Z shooter should make sure they have the latest firmware update, whatever model they're shooting with. Each of these firmware updates really improves the camera, and in this latest one, I'll show you why I think it really increases the autofocus tracking ease and accuracy for any kind of action shooting. Well, hi all, Hudson here. I'm back from Florida, first trip in like 18 months. While I was away, Nikon dropped firmware updates for all of the Nikon Z cameras that had autofocus enhancements, essentially, especially for the Z6 II, Z7 II. And I was able to use it. I took my Z7 II and my Z50 along on the trip, and I shot quite a bit of birds and wildlife and my kids. Playing with other kids on the beaches and playgrounds. Shot a ton of action, both with eye detect and just auto area autofocus on wildlife with subject tracking, without subject tracking. And I found that new firmware update is substantial, and I would recommend that whatever Z camera you're using, you jump in and make sure that you have it upgraded. I'll show you why. I'll go through a bunch of images and I'll talk about sort of my observations with it. I want to really quickly thank everyone who's been supporting this channel. Thank everyone who's using my links to buy gear. That is a real huge help. You can always find those links at hudsonhenry.com/ATS links. I also want to invite everyone to office hours on June 1st. We're going to be talking about night and low light photography. I've really been focusing in a lot on doing star and Milky Way work, real precision work to get printable images of the night sky, and I'm working on a video training course which will be dropping soon. Talk a little bit about that at the end of this video. As always, the sections of this video are chaptered out. There's a table of contents in the description along with links to the things I talk about, along with links to Nikon's firmware update site. You can also update your firmware via Snapbridge. We'll talk about that in a second. And there's a chaptered out section. If you just scroll along the timeline, you can click on whatever part of the video you want to watch or rewatch. That's always the case. All right, everyone. So, first off, I want to just talk about the different firmware that they launched. So they literally did sort of a Z camera wide firmware upgrade on the 26th of April for the Z50, the Z5, the Z6, the Z7, the Z6 II, the Z7 II. You can see the versions right here. They're all new. It tells you what's in there. And I really found that I found that the autofocus was just nicer for tracking throughout. Now, I have found that the AFS mode, for those who shoot Nikon, the static mode when you're shooting landscapes or a still subject, has just been incredibly accurate. The low light autofocus is incredible. I've found I can easily focus on planets when I'm out shooting the Milky Way or focus a star, and that low light focus mode is just kind of incredible. Well, the latest firmware update seems to have sped that up a little bit for the Z6 II and Z7 II. I haven't really tested it on the Z6 and Z7 yet. And one of the things that's really nice is that it seems to have increased the ability to track faces and eyes without losing them the minute someone turns away. It keeps tracking the back of their head until it acquires another face. And there's something that's happened with the Zs for a while that I think those of us who've been shooting them for a while have gotten used to, which is the fact that sometimes when you're shooting with face detect or eye detect and the action's moving really fast, that box around the eye or the face kind of looks like it's off of the face of the eye for a second, and then pops back on it. And when you actually review the images in the camera, you realize it's all in focus. It's just that box isn't tracking as quickly as it could. And that has been ridiculously improved. I feel that in this latest firmware update, particularly on the Z6 II, Z7 II, acquisition, say of birds in flight or fast moving subjects is better. The handoff between faces as people are moving in and out of the frame or different people are turning towards you and away from you is better, and it tends to hold on to a subject even if the face is turned away and it's just the back of the subject's head. You keep the person in focus. We'll talk about that, and I'll show you some examples and some sequences that I was shooting both with the Z50 and with the Z7 Z7 II, which I have with me on the trip to Florida. I will say that I didn't even go to this Nikon website that I've got up right here. You know, this is a place to go. I've got it linked in the video's description. But if you're using Snapbridge, the mobile app for Nikon, which is a great tool for keeping your clock synced when you're traveling, choosing to encode your files with GPS coordinates from your phone if you want to while you're out shooting, bringing in RAW files or JPEGs either automatically or at will to your mobile device to share over social media or just to send back home and or take a look at what you shot during the day while you're having dinner on your tablet or your phone. Also can do firmware updates, which is really nice. So if you just connect your camera to the Snapbridge app and there's a firmware update, you can just automatically do it through your mobile device without even working with your camera or downloading a file and putting it on the card. It's a really, really nice way to do your firmware update. So look through this list. Make sure that if you're shooting a Z50, you're at firmware 2.1. If you're shooting a Z5, you're at 1.1. If you're shooting a Z6 or Z7, you're at 3.3, and if you're shooting a Z6 II or Z7 II, you're at 1.2, because that's the sweet spot to be. So I'm going to show you some images. These are pretty much straight out of the camera. I think I've edited basically 0 of them from Florida. A bunch of them are with my Z50. This is the Z50 with the 70-200 on it. Just shooting my kids playing with some neighbor kids of my in-laws in the surf here in just the beach near my in-laws' house. And you can see, you know, I'm not using anything but auto area autofocus mode in the AFC. So I've got autofocus continuous, and I'm shooting it in auto area. I'll run in here. Auto area autofocus with face and eye detect people. Auto area autofocus people, and you know, making sure that I have face and eye detect turned on in my menu. You can go into my settings menu for the Z50 or the Z6 or the Z6 and Z7 IIs. I'll link those in the video's description. I have full sort of setup guides. I'll put the latest autofocusing video that I put up that really talks about my thoughts on autofocus and how to set up the camera for autofocusing action. Essentially, I like to shoot action on the Z cameras in auto area autofocus mode, and if I'm moving with fast moving subjects like this, I don't even choose a focus point. I let the camera make all the decisions. If there's faces or eyes and I want to switch between people, it's as easy as moving the joystick or the D-pad on the back once it locks in a face or an eye and there's an arrow and you can bump between them. For birds and wildlife, it tends to just pick up the closest subject that's moving rapidly. If you want to identify a different subject, or if it's not picking up the subject that you're after because it's not filling the frame enough or not moving enough, you can activate subject tracking, and I remap that to the front function 2 button. There's a whole video about that. If you haven't watched it, I'm linking it in the video's description. Just click the title or show more. But you can see, as I roll through these shots, I mean, it's just doing a fantastic job with my 70-200 2.8S on the Z50. Keeping all my subjects tracked. And this is actually a whole sequence just sort of shot in a row that I was shooting these kids playing in shore break at the beach. And I'll show you a little video, and this is what I'm talking about. Even though she turns her head, it keeps tracking her, which is something that it used to sort of stutter about before the firmware update. It automatically just wants to lock on whatever face it sees, and it particularly is going to lock in on the closest subject and just keep tracking it. And I mean, it's just incredible, the keeper rate. It's so much better than I was getting even with my Nikon D500 in dynamic area mode. Let me show you the situation that I was shooting in. I shot a little video and I shot it in full auto area mode in autofocus full time with video. So I was essentially letting the camera just autofocus continuously. I'm hand holding a 70-200 pretty tight, and I'm letting the camera make all the decisions except occasionally picking which face with just arrows as faces pop up. But pretty much the camera's just making all the decisions here. And my kids are just playing in the surf. My wife's having a conversation with the neighbor kid's nanny. And you watch it just sort of nail focus on everyone, not to mention the in-body image stabilization working in conjunction with that 70-200S. I mean, this is handheld with a 200 millimeter, and it's just the video. This is with the Z50. Again, I'm not shooting with the Z7 II. The Z50 shoots incredible quality video, really high dynamic range scene. I'm in manual mode. I dialed in an exposure to 50th of a second shutter speed with a little bit of neutral density. And you can just see that's the situation that all those shots I just showed you were coming in from. All right, so going back, let's look at some scenes. These are still Z50 shots, just shooting pelicans as they come ripping through. The tracking, the autofocus, I mean, look at that. It's just fabulous. Now, the Z50 isn't as high a resolution. It's not testing the limits of that 70-200 millimeter S lens. But I'll show you some images with the Z7 II in a second. There it is. You know, the surfer being out at the break with these birds coming in low doesn't interrupt the camera's autofocus. Of course, you can adjust those settings. This is with the Z7 II, and it's at the alligator farm, which is a kind of a zoo in St. Augustine. They're actually very conservation minded, and they have this spectacular habitat, wetlands, where there are just tons of nesting birds. It's a great tip for anyone in the Southeast. You know, I've heard a lot of people complaining about somehow the Z camera is having a problem if there's any busy kind of background tracking action, but I think if you watch that sequence of this bird coming in, you can see that even as it drops down through the trees and has this fence and other birds in the frame, it's just continuing to track really, really nicely. You know, here we've got an egret coming in with nesting material, and I'm not choosing an autofocus point at all. I'm just tracking the bird with the camera, and it just continues nailing autofocus as I'm moving with the bird. You know, handing my wife the Z50 with a kit lens and telling her just, you know, push that auto focus on button on the back. Here's my 500 PF on the Z7, and you can just see, I mean, it's pretty darn incredible. Now that's a situation with a static subject where I'm going to grab the subject tracking box. I'm going to hit that function 2 button with my ring finger on my right hand, and then use the joystick and put that subject tracking box right over the bird's eye. The bird's not moving, I'm not tracking the bird. I want to tell the camera right where to focus. If the bird starts moving, I can tap that function 2 button on the front again with my finger and go back to automatic area where it's selecting an autofocus point based on what it sees. And again, here, you know, putting it on the baby bird's eyes. But essentially, you know, here's some just kind of highlights from the trip, surfing with my kiddos. And this is, again, my wife, who's not a professional photographer, hasn't worked that much with the camera. The Z50 with the 70-200 on it, you know, the eye detect is just incredible. And again, you know, I was tracking this pelican coming in, and there's my in-law's neighbor teaching his wife to surf, and the pelican coming by, my wife Stacy, and egret in the trees. I just found that with the firmware update, it's acquiring a subject quicker. I was nailing birds on the second shot or the first shot as I picked them up in the sky. It was doing a better job of holding them as they move through complex backgrounds. Again, you know, I think that if you're a DSLR shooter coming to the mirrorless game and you've been shooting a Nikon a long time and you see that dynamic area mode that you're used to using with your DSLR, forget about that. That's a legacy mode. Go into that auto area autofocus. If you have action that's moving in the frame that you're tracking, the camera will pick your subject up automatically. If it's having a hard time at all picking your subject up, or if it's picking the wrong subject in a more static scene or a scene where your subjects are further away and there's multiples of them, just hit that subject tracking button, remap that to where it's really easy to get to with a finger that you're not using. I really like putting it on function 2 for action photography. And again, I'm linking that latest setup video that I did about that in this video's description. And all of a sudden you can put the box over your subject and nail it. The minute that you're tracking fast action moving through the frame again, turn it off and let the camera choose. 90% of the shots I'm showing you here, 95%, I'm not picking an autofocus point. The camera's doing it all for me as I just track my subject and try to keep it where I want in the frame. Anytime there's a human face or eyes, the camera just locks in. I mean, it's just spectacular the way that I find that it works. Here's a little tribute to my wife post Mother's Day. Not only is she the best wife and the most amazing mom, but she is one badass woman. Here she is out surfing, and a pretty big day in Florida. We had a little bit of fun kite surfing out there, and it's fun that the season is starting back up. And that's going to give me some more chances to do some sports and action work with the Nikon Z cameras and this new firmware. So finally, I'm going to bring up this image that I shot last week out on Mount St. Helens on the north side with my good friends Dan and Cody. And I'm really practicing and kind of honing these skills to get beautiful, clean, printable night images. This is Mount St. Helens in the Milky Way with some trees that were knocked down and stumps from the initial eruption. And I'll zoom in and show you what I've been kind of getting here. So I've got a course coming on the basic kind of technique for doing this. And it's involving a move, shoot, move star tracker, which is my favorite way to capture the Milky Way. It's a really quick, simple setup, doesn't weigh more than a pound in your bag, and just works magically to get beautiful skies. And then I've been sort of honing some techniques for nighttime foregrounds, and I'm going to share all that in a short video course on night photography very, very soon. I'll walk you through the creation of this image. So look for that. Next week, I'm going to be in the Palouse with my good friend Rick LePage, having some fun, shooting some stuff, getting some new content. We're both vaccinated. It's time to get out working with friends and collaborating and learning again. I hope all of you are getting out there, being safe, having fun, being creative. And the world is opening up again. For those that are maybe someplace where things are still rough, I hope that changes soon, and I hope that you stay safe. Again, stay creative. If you haven't signed up for the office hours on June 1st, we're going to be talking more about this night photography stuff. I'm really excited about it. Leave a question, sign up at hudsonhenry.com/office hours. I hope to see you there. You can join us on Zoom, or you can watch it on YouTube Live, and it'll be archived like all the other office hours on YouTube. So, all right, everybody, stay safe, and we'll see you next week.